One of the reasons for trying to create a rift between China and Africa is to promote their own agenda of dominance. And anyone who disagrees with them will have to be punished.
In 2020, times have changed. China has become much stronger and much more powerful. And the European states, including UK, have learned to adjust to power. I'll give you a concrete example. In the year 2001, after 9/11 happened, it was terrible. The United States became the first modern developed country to introduce torture.
Welcome to Drive for Africa, where we dive into the captivating interplay of global powers and their impact on the African continent. In this episode, we explore a thought-provoking debate on whether the West should adopt a tougher stance on China, featuring the insightful arguments of Professor Kishore Mahbubani as China continues its peaceful rise, reshaping global dynamics and forging strategic partnerships across Africa. We examine why a confrontational approach may not only be impractical but unwise. Join us as we unravel the complexities of international relations, the lessons of history, and the pathways to a harmonious global order. Don't miss this engaging discussion that challenges the status quo and envisions a future where cooperation triumphs over conflict. Stay tuned for more fascinating insights, and remember to like, share, and subscribe to Drive for Africa for a front row seat to the unfolding global narrative. Let's begin.
There are reservations and skepticism on the accuracy of the forecast and doomsday predictions in relation to the voluminous scientific data collected so far. There are also those who bemoan media hype and sweeping generalizations pronounced in various conferences. But these differences of emphasis notwithstanding, the gravity and urgency of the situation will be downplayed only at our collective peril. In this perspective, and in our modest view, efficacy and impact of our collective response is positively correlated with the linkage and synergy we develop in a three-pronged approach: the national, continental, and global platforms and networks. The policies we articulate and the implementation mechanisms we map out at the individual national level will not provide the primary panacea to this global challenge. The second tier approach that has particular relevance to the summit, here are the programs that can be pursued at the collective continental level and supplement our individual national endeavors. In this context, Africa can tap and incorporate the numerous scientific measures undertaken by global players in the field to bolster its purposeful mitigation measures. At the institutional level, it will be important for our continent to establish its own professional African advisory panel to undertake timely research and complement available literature on the subject. Africa must strive to foster and develop viable and national framework of cooperation on climate change at the global level or in the third track. This is vital both for reasons of synergy and also because Africa deserves much support as it has largely been on the receiving end. Indeed, its greenhouse gas emission footprint has been and remains comparatively small. In conclusion, may I remind this August gathering that Africa mobilize its own resources rather than extend hands for handouts that may aggravate the existing situation by inviting interference and corrupt practices, while mobilizing our own resources will be enabling and motivating creativity at the level of the continent.
This stupid idea of imposing your will on others' sovereign and independent choice and trying to keep their economies and try to create the disruptions here and there. One of the reasons for trying to create a rift between China and Africa is to promote their own agenda of dominance. And anyone who disagrees with them will have to be punished. For us, been a long experience, we've been able to face this challenge, and in solidarity with our partners in Africa, with China, Asia, Europe, Americas, definitely. It's not deniable. It does disrupt economic development here or there. It cripples abilities here and there. But that's one of the challenges. The damage done to our economy through these sanctions have been tremendous. But we say we have learned our lesson. It has made us more resilient and more determined to continue our struggle, endeavor to change the quality of life by improving our economy.
My case, quite simply, in opposition to the motion, it's time for the West to get tough on China, is number one, it won't work. Number two, it's not wise. And number three, there are better ways of getting China to improve itself or change its behavior. So first point, why won't it work? The simple answer is that China is too big. I mean, there was, of course, a time when the West could trample all over China, send its forces in, force the Chinese to accept opium, have British settlements in Shanghai, and sack the Summer Palace. I mean, the West could do anything it wanted vis-a-vis China, right? 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. This is 2020. Times have changed. China has become much stronger and much more powerful. And the European states, including UK, have learned to adjust to power. I'll give you a concrete example. In the year 2001, after 9/11 happened, it was terrible. The United States became the first modern developed country to introduce torture. A clear violation of all the human rights provisions that Tom has mentioned earlier. And torture is absolutely unacceptable. But guess what? When the United States reintroduced torture, not one European government criticized the United States, not one. Pragmatism. They knew it won't make a difference, right? So the Europeans have learned how to be pragmatic on human rights issues. So, and what the rest of the world sees, of course, is double standards. You'll criticize China, but you won't criticize United States. And so that's why I say it won't work. But the second reason why it won't work is that the West, which by the way only represents 12% of the world's population, 88% live outside the West, have very diverse interests today, very diverse interests. And so, for example, I agree, United States clearly has launched a major geopolitical contest against China, which I document in my book, Has China Won, as Marvin mentioned. But the European Union has got very different interests vis-a-vis China. The number one challenge to the European Union is not going to come from Russian tanks. Russian tanks are not going to invade Europe anymore. The biggest challenge the European Union faces is that the demographic challenge from Africa. In 1950, Africa's population was double that of Africa's, 1950. Today, Africa's population is more than double that of Europe. And by 2100, Africa's population will be 10 times the size of Europe. So Europe has got a very strong national interest to promote the development of Africa. And you know what? The best partner, if you want to promote the development in Africa, is the biggest new investor in Africa, which is China. And this explains why several European Union states, including Italy, Greece, and others, have joined the Belt and Road Initiative because they see that the development of Africa is in Europe's strategic interest. And so if you want European states, they won't sacrifice their interests just to join the British in criticizing China. And the other point I will make, which is, I guess I hope you'll bear this in mind all the time, when I said that the world, when the West represents only 12% of the world's population, 88% lives outside the West. And most of the 7 billion people don't want to join any Western crusade against China. So that's the key reason why you shouldn't do it. But the second reason is that it's not wise because, when at a time when China has emerged from what they call a century of humiliation, and now that the Chinese people have seen the greatest poverty upliftment program in human history with 800 million people rescued from poverty, just when their lives are getting better, the West is once again knocking them and kicking them. And the Chinese will then come back very ferociously and say, you have no moral right to lecture us. Because when we were weak, when we were downtrodden, when our people were suffering from poverty, when our people were suffering from famine, when our people were suffering from starvation, you didn't bring human rights to us. What did you do? You conquered us. You trampled on us. You burned our summer palace. And so as a result of that, what you're going to get in return from China is a massive amount of anger, which is not going to work in the interest of the West over the long term. So Napoleon was very wise when he said, let China sleep. For if it wakes, it will shake the world. And so far, China has been rising peacefully, hasn't fought a war in 40 years, hasn't fired a bullet in 30 years. Why do you want to provoke this dragon and make it angry, right? And the second reason why it's not wise is that China can retaliate. Now China is so much bigger. I mean, China's GNP, by the way, is almost 6 times the British GNP. And today, after Brexit, when you're trying to forge a new future for the UK, when you're trying to make London as a financial center very strong, London's prospects as a financial center will be hugely damaged if you cannot trade in the renminbi, the currency of the second biggest economy in the world. And actually, London has worked up some very good, wise, prudential arrangements with China. All this is going to be jeopardized by any kind of crusade against China. And then you'll find what will happen then. Every country will say, okay, this is not where my interests lie. I'm sure we will discuss Australia in due course, but in some ways, Australia has also blocked China in the corner by publicly criticizing China, by making Chinese lose face, and for the Asians, losing face is something terrible. And now, sadly, as a friend of Australia, I feel very sad because Australia has got itself stuck into a position which will be very difficult for it to extricate itself for. So finally, in the 1 or 2 minutes I have, let me just suggest how are the better ways for managing China. And here, as someone who was a diplomat for 33 years, as someone who studied Western philosophy, and when I was ambassador to the UN, I would have said, if you want to persuade someone, use reason, logic, and charm. And then you can get your point of view across, especially to someone who's much bigger than you. And I do think that if you do that privately with the Chinese and talk to them and explain that some of the things they're doing are wrong, they should do them better, you're more likely to have an impact and see changes. And it's also important to realize that at the end of the day, what matters to the Chinese government is how the Chinese population, how the 1.4 billion people in China regard the government of China. And you have to know that the Harvard Kennedy School, the Ash Center came out with a study, a very serious, rigorous academic peer-reviewed study, which said that support for the Chinese government among the Chinese people has gone up from roughly 86% in 2003 to 95% in 2016. So this is a government that enjoys the support of its people, and you're not going to move it through any kind of criticism from outside. Instead, try to have a decent, respectful dialogue with the government of China, and you're more likely to achieve whatever you want to achieve with China.